defending our country against evil jihadis. He's a warrior of truth, such a patriot. Oh my Gadi.
Welcome, fellow infidels. I am Gadi Adelman. Today is June 5th, 2011, and it is Naksa Day. Yes, Syrian TV is now reporting that 20 people were killed and over 325 were wounded after the Israeli Defense Forces fired on them when they tried to cross the border between Syria and Israel. What did we think was going to happen? Now, you may remember that last month on May 15th, which was Nakba Day, the day of catastrophe, that they had the same incident where 14 people were killed when they stormed the border and they crossed over into the Israeli side and the Israelis attempted to stop them. Well, the same thing happened today, only a little bit worse. Let's see, where shall we start? Of course, Syria is claiming that the Israelis are at fault, but truth be told, some 4 different landmines were detonated during the crossing of these protesters into Israel. What had happened was these nonviolent activists, these protesters, were throwing Molotov cocktails at the Israeli Defense Forces when they started a brush fire. The brush fire set off the landmines which were on the Syrian side of the border. Those that did make it to the Israeli side cut through barbed wire, and then they proceeded to try and storm the fence between what would be no man's land, you know, that place where the UN is supposed to be watching, that little area where the United Nations is in charge, and they're supposed to make sure things like this don't happen. Well, when these thousands of protesters got across, cut the barbed wire, and stormed the Israeli side, after the Israelis fired tear gas, after they shot their weapons into the air, they had no choice, and they started shooting at people's legs, ergo a lot of injuries. Exactly how many people died because of gunfire versus them setting off their own landmines, no one knows, and I'm sure an investigation will follow. But once again, this is nothing more than provocation. Let's blame Israel. Let's see how far we can push them. And of course, when Israel reacts in self-defense, the whole world is going to scream once again, demand that an investigation be done. I'm sure the European Union will come out and say it. I'm sure the United Nations will come out and say it. Heck, I'm sure even America will say it. Once again, let's blame the Jews. Let's blame the Israelis. Let's think about this, people, okay? May 15th was Nakba Day, the day of catastrophe. That was a commemoration or the anniversary of the Israeli independence. Today, Naksa Day, is the day of the setback. Yeah, one heck of a setback. It's actually the 44th anniversary of the 1967 Six-Day War. So once again, they've asked people to march on Jerusalem. Just get there any way you can. Protesters from the West Bank, from Gaza, from Lebanon, from Syria, and storm the borders and march to Jerusalem. Well, that's all fine and dandy, but there's definitely a lot of Syrian fingerprints behind this one. How did all these people get to the border? Oh, yes, they were bussed in by Syria and then told to go and storm the border. I don't know what's worse, the Syrian government for attempting to get people to do this, or those that actually went ahead and did it. But either way, what did they think was going to happen? When you have an enemy, Syria, who is technically still at war with Israel since 1967, and you have another nation, Israel, side by side, with a no man's land in between, barbed wire on both sides, landmines on the Syrian side, and you send 1,000 people rushing across that no man's land to the fence of the Israeli side from enemy territory, what do you think is going to happen? You know, Israel has a right to defend itself just like any other country, but of course when they do it, it gets screamed about by the whole world. You know, of course, they were using too much force. It's going to be excessive force because they used, God forbid, weapons such as tear gas and bullets to protect their borders. What would any other country do? This is nothing more than provocation. This is all leading up to September later this year when the Palestinian Authority is going to ask the UN to vote on Palestinian statehood. We talk about this on my radio show, America Akbar, week in and week out. I've been speaking about this on my radio show since before Hosni Mubarak, the former president of Egypt, was ousted back in January. I saw this coming, I spoke about it then, and I've been speaking out on it ever since. Every single thing happening in this so-called Arab Spring, which I have referred to in my articles as the Arab Perfect Storm, is nothing more than a lead-in to September. September is when they are going to ask the United Nations to vote on Palestinian statehood. And what would be so much better than if the Palestinian Authority could go to the United Nations and say, but look at how many of our people have died because of Israel. Well, look at how many of your people were stupid enough to try and cross a border illegally from enemy territory. This flotilla that's upcoming later this month, same thing. Nothing more but provocation. Open your eyes, people, and start to smell the Turkish coffee. It is time to put an end to this once and for all. Truth be told, it's nothing more than provocation. The Palestinians are not living in squalor. Go online, look at their beautiful five-star hotels, their five-star restaurants, their nightlife, their beach resorts. Hell, they just built a monument, a memorial standing 30 feet high, 3 stories high, to those that were killed last year during the Gaza flotilla. Now the Rafah border crossing, that's the border crossing between Egypt and Gaza, has been reopened. So what's the need for the flotilla later this month? There is none other than provocation. This is all a lead into September. Mark my words. So when you start hearing over the next few days or later this month, heck, for that matter, the rest of this summer, about how Israel is holding the Palestinians prisoner, about how Israel is treating the Palestinians like slaves, about how Israel is shooting these poor, innocent Palestinians who are trying to cross the border illegally, remember that it's nothing more than provocation so that the PA, the Palestinian Authority, can go to the United Nations later this year and say, please, 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 we're tired of being treated this way. Give us our state. Remember that, folks. You heard it here first. America Akbar.